The various elements of civilization considered as an exterior manifestation of the soul of a people. The elements of which a civilization is composed are the exterior manifestations of the soul of the peoples which have created them. The importance of these various elements varies with the different peoples. According to the several peoples, it is the arts, literature, institutions, etc. that fill the fundamental role. Examples from antiquity: the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans. The evolution of the different elements of a civilization may be independent of the general march of that civilization. Examples supplied by the arts: what they express, impossibility of finding in a single element of a civilization the measure of the level of that civilization, elements which assure the superiority of a people, elements which philosophically are very inferior may be socially very superior. The different elements, languages, institutions, ideas, beliefs, arts, literature of which a civilization is composed should be regarded as the exterior manifestation of the soul of the men who have created them. The importance, however, of these elements as the expression of the soul of a people varies greatly with the period and the races. Few books relating to works of art appear at the present day that do not contain the statement that works of art are the faithful rendering of the thought of peoples and the most important expression of their civilization. Doubtless it is often true that this is the case, but the rule is a long way from being absolute, and the development of the arts is far from corresponding invariably to the intellectual development of nations. While there are certain peoples for whom works of art are the most important manifestation of their soul, there are others who occupy, moreover, a high rank in the scale of civilization, among whom the arts have played but a very secondary part. If the history of the civilization of each people had to be written on the understanding that only one of its elements was to be considered, the element chosen ought to vary in the case of each people. For some peoples the element would be the arts, but for others it would be their institutions, their military organization, their industry, their commerce, etc., that would give the best knowledge of them. It is important to establish this point at the outset, for it will enable us later to understand how it is that the various elements of a civilization have undergone very unequal transformations when transmitted from one people to another. Among the peoples of antiquity, the Egyptians and Romans offer highly characteristic examples of this inequality in the development of the various elements of a civilization, and even in the various branches of which each of these elements is composed. Let us begin by considering the Egyptians. Their literature was always very weak, their painting of very poor quality. In architecture and statuary, on the contrary, they produced masterpieces. Their monuments will excite our admiration. The Egyptian statues that have come down to us, the scribe, the Sheikh al-Beled, Ra-otep, Nefertari, and many others would still be models at the present day, and it was only during a very short period that they were surpassed by the Greeks. With the Egyptians, let us compare the Romans, whose role in history was so preponderating. They lacked neither educators nor models, since they came after the Egyptians and Greeks, and yet they did not succeed in creating a personal art. No people perhaps has ever displayed less originality in its artistic productions. The Romans held the arts in very slight esteem, scarcely regarding them from other than a utilitarian point of view, and looking on them merely as a sort of imported article, analogous to the other products such as metals, aromatics, and spices for which they were indebted to foreign peoples. At the period when they were already masters of the world, the Romans had no national art, and even later on, when universal peace, wealth, and the needs of luxury somewhat developed their weak artistic sentiments, it was always to Greece that they went for models and artists. The history of Roman architecture and sculpture is scarcely more than an appendix to the history of the sculpture and architecture of Greece. On the other hand, this great Roman people, which was so inferior in the arts, developed three other elements of civilization to the highest pitch. It possessed military institutions, which ensured it the empire of the world, political and juridical institutions which still serve us as models. And finally, it created a literature which for centuries has been the source of inspiration of our own. We thus have a striking example of the unequal development of the elements of a civilization in the case of two nations whose high degree of culture cannot be contested, and we can divine the errors that would result from taking as sole standard but one of these elements, the arts for example. We have just found that among the Egyptians, the arts, with the exception of painting, were extremely original and remarkable, while literature, on the contrary, did not rise above mediocrity. Among the Romans, the arts were mediocre and without a trace of originality, but they shone in the field of literature, and their military and political institutions were of the highest order. The Greeks themselves, though one of the peoples that has displayed the most superiority in the most different fields, may also be cited in proof of the unequal way in which the development of the various elements of the civilization proceeds. At the Homeric epic, their literature was already very brilliant, since the songs of Homer are still regarded as the models with which the students of the European universities are condemned to saturate themselves, a view that has been taken for centuries past. But the discoveries of modern archaeology have proved that, at the period to which the Homeric songs belong, Greek sculpture and architecture were grossly barbarian and confined to crude imitations of Egyptian and Assyrian art. However, it is more especially the Hindus that furnish us with an example of the unequal development of the different elements of a civilization. As regards architecture, they have been surpassed by very few peoples. As regards philosophy, the depth of their speculations has only been attained to by European thought at a quite recent date. In literature, if they do not reach the level of the Greeks and Latins, they have nevertheless produced admirable work. Their statuary, on the contrary, is mediocre and much below that of the Greeks. In the domain of science and in that of historical knowledge, they have absolutely nothing to show, and they exhibit an absence of precision that is not met with to an equal degree in any other people. Their sciences have been mere childish speculations, their histories absurd legends, containing not a single exact date and probably not a single exact event. In their case, once again, the exclusive study of the arts would be insufficient to determine the level of their civilization. Many other examples might be adduced in support of what precedes. There are races which, although they have never occupied an absolutely superior rank, have succeeded in creating an absolutely personal art bearing no visible relation to anterior models. The Arabs are a case in point. Less than a century after they had invaded the old Greco-Roman world, they had so utterly transformed the Byzantine architecture they had begun by adopting that it would be impossible to determine the types that had inspired them, if it were not that we are still able to consult the series of intermediary monuments. Moreover, even if a people should not possess any artistic or literary aptitude, it is capable of creating a civilization of a superior order. This happened in the case of the Phoenicians, whose sole superiority was their skill in commerce. It was they who civilized the ancient world by bringing all its parts into communication. But as far as they themselves were concerned, they produced scarcely anything, and the history of their civilization is the history of their commerce. Finally, there are peoples among whom all the elements of civilization have remained in an inferior state, with the exception of the arts. The Mongolians were a people of this kind. The monuments they raised in India, in a style about which there is scarcely anything Hindu, are so magnificent that competent artists declare that some of them rank among the most beautiful monuments that have been raised by the hand of man, and yet nobody could think of classing the Mongols among the superior races. It will be noticed, moreover, that even among the most civilized peoples, it is not always at the culminating period of their civilization that the arts attain to the highest degree of development. Among the Egyptians and among the Hindus, the most perfect monuments are generally the most ancient, while in Europe it was in the Middle Ages, an epoch regarded as semi-barbarian, that flourished that marvelous Gothic art whose admirable productions have never been equaled. In consequence, it is quite impossible to judge of the level of a people solely by the development of its arts, which constitute, I repeat, but one of the elements of its civilization, and an element whose superiority is not proven any more than the superiority of literature is proven. It often happens, on the contrary, that it is among the peoples at the head of civilization, the Romans for instance, in ancient times, and the Americans at the present day, that artistic productions show the most weakness. Frequently, too, as we just remarked, it has been in semi-barbarous ages that the peoples have produced their literary and artistic masterpieces, their artistic masterpieces more especially. It would even seem that the period of personality in the arts in the case of a people, is a growth belonging to its childhood or its youth, and not to its maturity. And if it be considered that among the utilitarian preoccupations of the new world of which we catch a glimpse of the dawn, the role of the arts is scarcely observable, we may foresee the day when they will be classed, if not among the inferior, at least among the quite secondary manifestations of a civilization.